He had wondered how the man knew the freckled palace woman Maomao, but now it was starting to make sense. Jinshi asked, "Might I have a moment of your time?" It was a polite request. Lehaku was hardly in a position to refuse. The other man was younger than Lehaku, but the jeweled ornament at his hip showed a more esteemed color. If Lehaku did not do as he was asked, he might never get the promotion he sought. "As you wish," he said, and then he followed the eunuchs. They were in a courtyard of the palace. Officers often went there to enjoy the refreshing breeze on summer nights. Lehaku did not visit often, to be honest. He had never been very interested in beautiful things. The chill in the air this season was more than just refreshing. It was becoming quite cold. Considering the time of year and the time of day, they could expect to be undisturbed. During the summer, flowers called big-leaf hydrangeas would bloom. Their blossoms would be as large as embroidered hand balls. These were unusual flowers. They had been brought from an island country to the east. The color of the blossoms changed depending on the day. They might be red or they might be blue. The commander had specifically requested they be planted here. The blooms looked a little like lilacs, but right now they seemed like stubby bushes. Lehaku sometimes wondered if they gave the man too much freedom. However, people said that even the general had trouble speaking his mind with the monocled man, so perhaps there wasn't much that could be done. Jinshi took a seat in an open-air pavilion, then he gestured for Lehaku to do the same. Having no other choice, he sat down facing the eunuch. Jinshi rested his chin on his clasped hands and fixed Lehaku with a radiant smile. His aide, standing behind him, seemed entirely used to this, but Lehaku found himself somewhat unsettled. It was ridiculous, but the smile was so brilliant that he almost wanted to look away. He now realized that all the talk of how Jinshi could have brought the country to its knees if he were a woman was more than just idle gossip. But Jinshi was a man, even if he was missing something normally considered important for one. One could be deceived by his nymph-like smile and silken hair. However, his stature and the broadness of his shoulders gave him away. He did not seem frail, even when compared to his aide. The aide looked distinctly like a military man. Anyone who was misled by his delicate smile into thinking they might have their way with this person would likely find out otherwise, and painfully. Each movement he made was beautifully elegant and also completely efficient and precise. Lehaku had felt this even when he was simply following behind the eunuch. He had also thought the man looked somehow familiar, but he could not quite place him. The thought bothered him, even though he had only caught glimpses of Jinshi. He had never truly seen him face to face. What did a person of such high station want with him? "My attendant informs me that you, my boy, have your heart set on somebody." Would it be overthinking things? Lehaku wondered if he felt the comment about "my boy" was a somewhat unnecessary twist of the knife. It took him a second to understand who Jinshi meant by his attendant. He realized that in this context it could only be the scraggly, freckled girl. Come to think of it, she had apparently worked in the outer palace. Lehaku realized she had been working for this eunuch, of all people. He put his hand to his chin unconsciously. He had always thought it would take someone of very particular tastes to hire that woman as their personal servant. He never would have imagined this gorgeous eunuch would have those tastes. Even recognizing that the situation in which Jinshi had found them would require some explanation, Lehaku was a bit taken aback to realize she had told Jinshi of his desire to buy out Perrin's contract. Perhaps that was why the eunuch smiled at him with such intensity. It was humorous, really, for someone so young to want to buy one of the most beautiful and revered courtesans in the land, and Lehaku didn't mind if Jinshi thought he was a buffoon. Let him laugh at Lehaku, but if he intended to make light of Lehaku's beloved Perrin, then things might be different. Perrin was a good woman, not just a good courtesan but a good woman. He pictured her smiling at him in bed. He saw her dancing, holding up the hem of her robe with 2 fingers. He thought about the way she served tea, paying attention to every detail. Some people might say that was exactly what a courtesan should do, and with those people there was no room for further discussion, but Lehaku didn't mind. He did not care if it was real or not. As long as he believed in it, that was all that mattered. He had seen more than one of his colleagues lose themselves in women and gambling. To those around him, he might have just looked like another lost cause. People who said Perrin was not a good match for him likely meant well. He was grateful for their concern, but he wished they would stop interfering. Lihaku went to the verdigris house because he wanted to. Often he did not even see Perrin, but was simply served tea in the front room by an apprentice. And that was fine with him. It was part of Perrin's business to be as unreachable as a flower on a distant peak. If she charged a month's silver for a cup of tea, who was anyone to say that was greedy? Perrin devoted herself completely to being a courtesan. She was living merchandise, and anyone who claimed she was too expensive simply didn't understand her worth. That is why if the eunuch across from Lihaku tried to belittle Perrin, Lihaku was prepared to get physical with him. He knew it might cost him his head, and he could accept that. He had never compromised his principles or his beliefs. This way of life had always suited him, as straightforward and unrelenting as a charging animal. If those around him thought he had gone mad for some woman, let them. For the moment he controlled himself with an effort. He pressed his trembling hands together and looked at Jinchi. "And what if I do, sir?" He was careful not to add, "It's none of your business," or anything else unnecessarily antagonistic. Jinchi seemed to ignore Lihaku's dark expression. His heavenly smile did not change. What Jinchi said next surprised Lihaku. "What would you do if I offered to pay for her contract?" Lihaku gasped, stood up and slammed his fist on the table. The granite surface sent some of the force back at him. He could only speak when the shiver had passed through his entire body. "What do you mean by that?" "Precisely what I said. How much would it take to buy her out?" 20,000. Do you think that would be enough?" It was as if the number meant nothing to Jinchi, but it made Lihaku gulp. 20,000 was not an amount to simply give away, certainly not to an officer one barely knew. Had Jinchi already spoken to Maomao about the likely cost, or was the sum truly an afterthought for this man? Lihaku put his head in his hands. He did wonder if this man spoke of 20,000 as if it were nothing, then half that amount would be less than nothing to him. But he resolved not to get lost in a naive fantasy. "I am overjoyed by your words, sir," he said, "but I must wonder what would prompt such generosity towards someone you hardly know." Offers that were too good to be true always had a sting in the tail. Even a child knew that, and Lihaku wasn't foolish enough to forget this basic rule. He sat back in his chair and looked at the man across from him. The eunuch's expression showed no change despite having offered this staggering amount of money. However, his aide, standing behind him, looked slightly exasperated. "My cat is most wary, yet not only was she willing to speak to you, she seems to be earnestly considering you as a possible match for a woman she thinks of as an older sister." The cat must have been Maomao. It was the meaning of her name, and when Lihaku thought about it, he realized that she could indeed be cat-like. She was as suspicious of others as a stray cat. However, when there was food, she would come close enough to get it. She would take as much as she could and then disappear again. Lihaku had never wanted a cat. If he was going to have an animal, he would have liked a dog. He wanted something that could hunt with him. Despite the eunuch's choice of metaphor and despite Maomao's attitude, she apparently trusted Lihaku to at least some extent. It was clear she thought it was annoying to have to answer his questions. However, she answered them nonetheless. It all came down to this conversation. "You are saying that when a cat who doesn't trust easily takes to someone, that is reason enough to have faith in them," Lihaku said. Jinchi flinched slightly. He wondered if he had said something wrong, but the soft smile returned to Jinchi's face so quickly that Lihaku questioned if he had imagined it. "I asked around about you," Jinchi said. "I heard you are the son of a provincial official. It must have taken quite a bit of work to rise up the ranks in the capital." "A fair amount. There were cliques and factions everywhere. His father had been an official, yes, but only a regional civil administrator." That meant a difficult start for Lihaku, and it took a good deal of time before people truly took him seriously. Someone said a commander discovered him, recognizing his talent and entrusting him with a unit of his own. "Yes, sir," Lihaku said hesitantly. He wondered how much this man had learned about him. Lihaku was supposedly promoted after the commander of a small unit left the service. Jinchi continued, and who wouldn't want to be on good terms with a promising young soldier? Many might, but rarely to the tune of 20,000 silver. Lihaku only really needed half that amount. or actually, if one factored in his own contributions and all he could scare up, even just a quarter of it would do. 1/4 or 5,000 in silver. Would this man really just give it to him? Lihaku was nearly sick with wishing for it, but he shook his head. He looked at Jinchi seriously and said, "I truly do appreciate your vote of confidence. I confess I am almost beside myself wanting to accept your offer, but I cannot take your silver. To you she may be simply another courtesan, but to me she is a woman I wish to take as my wife, and if I do not do that with my own money, then what kind of man am I?" Lihaku managed to say all of this to Jinchi, though it wearied him to be constantly alert to the tenor of his language. He had thought Jinchi might be peeved by his refusal, but that nymph-like smile did not change. He even thought it might have softened a little. Then the smile became laughter. "I see, I'm afraid I have been quite rude." The eunuch stood, utterly elegant, as he ran his fingers through his hair. He looked as if he had stepped out of a painting of a classical beauty, and he stood there with a satisfied smile on his face. "I think there may be something I will want to speak with you about later. Would you mind? Whatever you wish, sir." Lihaku stood up as well. He pressed a fist respectfully into his open palm and bowed. The gorgeous eunuch responded with a short nod, and then he and his aide went home. Lihaku watched Jinchi go. He was almost befuddled by his elegance until they were out of sight. Finally he murmured, "What was that all about?" and scratched his head, truly puzzled. His heart dropped a little when he felt the bald patch that still remained where his hair had been scorched off. He sat down again, mumbling, "What am I going to do?" He would have to try to show his best side to his superiors at their next training session, or maybe he could take on more work. No, there was something more important. He would send a letter to the woman he hoped to marry someday. He wouldn't simply take her without her consent. He wanted to know her feelings as well. Whatever she said in reply might be just for politeness, but he would place his faith in it, and it would sustain him. All right. Lihaku stuck his hands into his sleeves and set off from the courtyard at a brisk trot. He wondered what kind of branch would make the best accompaniment for his letter. Gyuan said, "Maomao, you have a letter." He held out a bundle of wood writing strips. Maomao took the bundle and undid the tie. The strips were covered in a light, flowing hand. It was a reply to the message she had sent to the Verdigris house several days earlier. "The old lady can say what she wants, but I am still earning plenty." The letter was from Perrin. Maomao could practically see her sensuous older sister puffing out her ample chest. "Besides, I am still waiting for a prince on his white horse to come and get me." In one far country, white horses were what princes were said to ride when they came to rescue trapped young maidens. Perrin was still a woman, and she had a woman's dreams. Perhaps it was a little late to call her a young maiden. She had already been with more gentlemen than could be counted on both hands, but she did not give up on the fantasy. Perhaps that stubbornness had preserved her youth for so long. Maomao suspected as much. If the man pleased her, she didn't even need the 10,000 silver. He simply had to play the part of her prince. The role demanded absolute physical strength and endurance, along with something that most men had but eunuchs did not. A little theatricality and some money for a celebration would be perfect. It wouldn't be necessary to buy Perrin out completely, but the community wouldn't let her go without acknowledging the occasion. The old madam herself once told Perrin, "If you want to retire, I won't stop you. But we are going to have the party to end all parties." It was a striking remark from a woman who was normally so tight-fisted. When Perrin left the stage, it would be commemorated as befitted one of the pleasure quarter's most beautiful blossoms. A courtesan had her pride after all. Therefore, for a man who suitably impressed Perrin, even the old madam wouldn't try to demand too much. But surely 5,000 or so was needed for the celebration. Anyone who couldn't come up with at least that much money wasn't fit for Perrin, and if they had the money but refused to spend it, that would show them as even worse. Yes, even if 10,000 was out of reach, 5,000 ought to be enough. If Lihaku continued to rise steadily through the ranks, he should be able to save that much within a few years. The rest would depend on luck. If Perrin were brainwashed by the old woman, it would spell the end. Lihaku just had to get her out of there before that happened. Maomao did not have a part to play in any of this. There was just one thing that worried her. Surely he wouldn't go into debt to get the money, she thought. If he took a loan to get the cash, the madam would discover it, and that would be it. She would demand, "How can I let Pairing go to a man mired in debt?" Maomao was fairly confident Lihaku wouldn't do anything so silly, but she could not be sure. With these thoughts running through her head, she found herself at the end of the letter. There she discovered something very troubling. Someone was coming around talking about buying out a contract. I think the apprentices misunderstood. A certain someone. That is right, Maomao thought. It was unusual for Pairing to be so indirect, but Maomao knew perfectly well who she was talking about. Maomao tied the letter closed again and placed it on a shelf in her room. When she emerged into the hallway, she discovered that Jinchi was visiting the Jade Pavilion for the first time in several days. He had looked downright stormy the last time they parted, but today he seemed in high spirits. Maomao went to the kitchen to prepare tea, wondering what might have him so pleased. Chapter 18 Blue Roses. The cold was gradually loosening its grip on the world, and the first hints of spring were in the air. Maomao stood outside drying some bedding. She felt she might succumb to the temptation of the warm, pleasant sun, but she shook her head. She must not sleep on the job. She forced herself to focus on her work. Time did pass quickly when one's days were full and satisfying. Even though the 2 months she had spent in Jinchi's employ had felt interminably long, she still longed sometimes for the larded shelves of medicines in the outer palace physician's office. However, she could rectify that issue here. She could work through the quack doctor to get the rear palace medical office up to speed. Meanwhile, she could lean on Gaoshun to get her anything she needed from the archives. She would have preferred to leave the rear palace whenever she wished, but one cannot always have everything. While serving there, she could not expect complete freedom to come and go. Consort Jayakai's pregnancy was becoming increasingly certain. Her menstrual cycle hadn't returned yet, and now she felt tired as well. Her temperature was a little higher than usual, and she seemed to be going to the restroom more often. Princess Lingli would sometimes press her cheek against Jayakai's stomach and smile, as if she knew something was inside. Can babies really tell? Maomao wondered. Lingli was waving goodbye to Jayakai's belly as Hongyang took her away for her afternoon nap. Children were most mysterious creatures. The princess had begun to toddle around on her own. The emperor gave Lingli a pair of little red shoes. She in turn gave the ladies in waiting their share of headaches. She had become more expressive. If you gave her a nice soft bun, she would smile broadly in return. The ladies in waiting of the Jade Pavilion had no children of their own, but they apparently did have the maternal instinct. They doted endlessly on the little princess. Hongyang became given to saying perhaps she would have one of her own sooner or later, but the other women, including Maomao, were not sure how to respond. Hongyang looked concerned when she said this. However, no one expected the devoted head lady in waiting to retire from her post. Even if a suitable offer had come along, the other women would most likely have done anything to stop Hongyang from leaving. She was the one who allowed the Jade Pavilion to function with such a small staff. Being too talented could have its own challenges. Maomao entertained Princess Lingli when she had no other work to do. Her leg injury was another factor in this. It was more efficient to have the woman with nothing to do but taste food look after the princess, rather than have the busy and able-bodied other ladies in waiting watch her on top of all their other duties. So on this day, Maomao found herself once more playing with Princess Lingli. The princess was making piles of wooden blocks, which were purposely constructed with light materials, and then knocking them down. She also showed some interest in illustrated books, so Maomao would copy the pictures from books she had Gaoshun borrow for her, writing the words below each one. Lingli was still only 2 years old, but Maomao had heard it was never too early to start them learning. Sadly, Hongyang ended her educational efforts early when she took the pictures. Draw flowers like a normal person, she instructed, pointing to the flowers in the courtyard. It seemed that no matter how excellent the renderings were, pictures of poisonous mushrooms were not allowed. That is how Maomao passed the time until one day a gorgeous eunuch appeared for the first time in quite a while, bringing trouble with him. "Blue roses, sir?" Maomao asked, looking at the eunuch with some fatigue. "Oh, yes. Everyone is quite interested, you see." Jinchi looked as if he was in something of a bind. To the palace women, he looked beautiful even in his distress. At this moment, 3 pairs of eyes were watching through the crack in the door. Maomao chose to ignore them. Shortly thereafter, Hongyang, looking rather exasperated, grabbed the owners of the eyes. She grabbed them quite nimbly, we might add. She held 2 with her right hand and 1 with her left and dragged them away. Maomao chose to ignore that too. Such capable handling, Gaoshun commented. Maomao would keep that remark to herself. Back to the subject at hand. Everyone would like to admire some of these flowers, Jinchi said. He was the one who was supposed to come up with them for some reason. Maomao thought this was going to be trouble. You want me to find some? She asked. I thought you might know something about them. I am an apothecary, not a botanist. It just seemed like something that might be in your wheelhouse, Jinchi offered weakly. Oh, very convincing, sir, Consort Jyokayu said gaily from where she was lounging on a couch.